Okay, when is the last time you asked someone for advice? Real advice, not like, oh, do these shoes match this dress? That doesn't really count as advice. No matter what, the answer is always going to be yes. And you look great and your rear end isn't large. Those are always just things. You already know the answer to those. Questions possibly around your household. But when's the last time you actually asked for some real advice, even outside of maybe YouTube? That YouTube, it can offer, you can gain some wisdom there if you go watch some videos. But when's the last time you asked somebody for serious advice about some of life's biggest questions? My guess is that you're going to have a hard time trying to find the last time you asked for serious advice on life. Why is that? Why is that? Is that like a pride thing, or is that like I want to do it on my own, or I don't want someone else to know that I'm struggling with this? Why is that? There's a few moments in life when we'll often ask for advice. When we're buying a car, we might shop around, we'll go look online a bunch, we might ask somebody else who has the car if they like it. So we're about to make a big purchase, and so we'll ask others for advice on that big purchase. The other time that we often will ask for advice, possibly, is when we're getting married. To some degree. The average couple spends less than 2 hours in some sort of pre-marriage counseling, advice on marriage, and more than 100 hours preparing for their wedding. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there. You spend over 100 hours for that one little ceremony day. It's important, yes, but less than 2 hours preparing for a whole lifetime with that partner. So you might ask for a little bit of advice during marriage, and the other time that we often ask for advice is when we're going to have children. If you're adopting kids, or you're having kids, or maybe you're just going to be babysitting kids for the first time, you'll ask for advice, and you'll start asking other people. You start reading books, and you get really serious because you realize it's a huge deal. So there's 2, 3, maybe 4 times in life where most of us have maybe asked for advice. But why don't we ask for advice on all the other bits and pieces of life? I sit with many different people in many different stages in life. And one of those was, I did youth ministry for a number of years. Almost 20 years I was in youth ministry. And a couple of times during youth ministry, I would do these, what we call sort of relationship retreats. And we would take a bunch of teenagers. The last one I went on was maybe 10 or 12 years ago. We took just over 200 teenagers on a retreat, and the whole weekend was focused on healthy relationships, dating and mating and marriage, and we had all these kind of cute little things, these topics we were focused on. But we did a poll from these 220 students that were all teenagers. They were tweens. They were aged, they weren't quite 11. Some were. Most of them were 12 to 18 or 19 years old. We did a poll of these 220 students, and we asked them to check off all the places where they try to find advice or seek advice on all these different topics, on like who you're going to marry and where you're going to go to college and who you're going to date. And in almost all of the sections, to some degree, they ask their peers for advice. Their pastor was almost never checked. Their parents maybe once. I wish I could go back and actually find this thing. I looked for it. I couldn't find it. The parents were asked about college, I think, that your kids would actually ask you about college. And that was it. Everything else, like who to date, how dates should go, all the sort of social things. Now, this was before, like, smartphones. And so you couldn't just go on social media and ask everybody. You actually had to talk to people and find out some of the things that they, communicate and say. So most of these tweens and teens got their advice from other tweens and teens. That is stupid. We're not allowed to say stupid in our house, but my kids aren't here this morning. They're in kid life. That is stupid. Why would you, as a 12 or 13-year-old, ask your other 12 or 13-year-old friend advice about something that they've never gone through? That is so dumb. And my daughter does it all day long. She'll be 13 this next month, and so she'll be dealing with stuff, and my wife and I will find out about it, and we're like, oh, well, why don't you talk to us? And she's like, oh, I talked to so-and-so and so-and-so. And in my brain, I'm thinking, you're an idiot. What are you doing? Those people are more messed up than you are. They don't have, their relationships are, even more difficult, and they're part of the problem here. And can't you see this? And they sort of can, maybe they can't, but that's who they feel comfortable with. And so as a father and as a mother, we try to offer good, sound counsel to our kids. This happened just the other night. Friday, Saturday. I don't even know. What is today? Sunday? Was it Friday night? Yeah, Friday night. It's parents' night out. So I was out, actually. I was out of town. I was coming back from out of town. My kids decided they were going to go to like this local gymnastics place for this student night out. So they invited some friends along, and they all went. Well, partway through, one family was supposed to pick up the group. So that family went by to pick up the group, and the group wasn't ready to go. The original ride came too early. They came at 10, and this deal went to at least 11, maybe later. So, a quick phone call, a couple of texts, they figured out, okay, one of the kids that was there, one of my daughter's friends, they texted their father, and their dad said, oh, okay, we'll pick you up at 11. So they're like, yes, we get an extra hour. So the original ride went home. The new ride is coming to pick them up at 11. The new ride gets there, this dad gets there, and his car seats 4 people, and there's 6 people who are at the event. So we get a phone call, and Amy gets a phone call saying, we can't fit everybody in the car, you need to come get them. Well, the event's over now, so they're just hanging out outside this gym. And she's like, I knew she wanted to ask me, but she didn't, because I'd already complained to her earlier, like, are you going to be staying up for these kids that you let go out so late? I'm tired, I'm going to bed. It's easy to blame and point fingers, and it's everybody else's fault. And so she was actually like, no, I'm going to sleep. Well, about 15 minutes later, she's dressed and walking out the door because they called to say, come pick up the kids. So here's the point. So we were talking that night, or maybe the next day, we said, why is it that we would allow about 3 or 4 12-year-olds to try to figure out, to get home and to get rides and to do all of that? Do you think they're old enough to realize, we need to think about seat belts and how many people will fit in a car? No. They're like, we want to stay later. We need another ride. Let's figure that out. Check. But then they ended up, because they did not seek wise counsel, because they are not wise. They are 12. Those don't go together. And so they were not seeking wise counsel, and then therefore my wife's headed out the door at 11:15, 11:30, not happy. And that's not wise for my child in that sort of situation. So it was quite a learning experience. But why do we do that? Why do we do that? We start growing up and we think, I want this amazing marriage. But we don't spend any time with people who have amazing marriages. We don't ask them for any sort of wise counsel, any advice. Like, I want to be totally successful in business or my career. But do you seek out really successful people in your career and say, can we sit down for lunch? Can I meet with you once a month? People all the time are like, I want to grow so deep in my relationship with God. And I'm like, okay, cool. Are you connected to a life group? Do you have a spiritual mentor? Are you connected with some way of growing? One of the key ways that God speaks to us in this life is through the wise counsel of others. Now hear that clearly. One of the key ways that God speaks to us in this life is through the wise counsel of other Christian people. But we almost never seek that counsel. That is crazy. I want us to look at a story about Rehoboam. It's in 1 Kings 12, and actually before we get there, let me give you a little bit of history. So you maybe heard of Abraham and Sarah. You can go read about them in Genesis. They are sort of the patriarchs of the Israelites and God's chosen people. And so you have Abraham and Sarah, and they were older, and God came to them and said, hey, I want you to have a baby. And they're like, okay, we can't because we're in our 80s. And actually Sarah's name is called the one who laughed. She laughed at God, which is kind of crazy in itself. Like, haha, God, you can't possibly have or help me have children. This is not, and I'm sure God laughed back. Anyway, Abraham and Sarah, go read about it. It's in Genesis. It's a pretty cool story. So Abraham and Sarah had this baby. They were a little bit older, but they had this baby, Isaac. Okay, so Isaac then grew up a little bit older, got older, he got married, and then he had a son, Jacob. Now Jacob actually had two wives and their brides and their maidservants. So he had 4 women that he had children with, and out of those 4 women, he had 12 children. Those 12 children became the 12 tribes of Judah. Okay, so you got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob had 12 kids. Those 12 kids became the 12 tribes of Judah. They were the 12 Israelite tribes. And so that those 12 sons kept having more sons and more family and whatnot, and it grew and it grew and it grew. 10 generations later, you then have this guy named Jesse. All right, Jesse had a son, David. Now, you maybe remember David. He was this little shepherd boy, but he kicked some tail on this huge giant named Goliath. And people are like, dude, you were awesome. David in Scripture is known as a man after God's own heart. All right, so now you're actually 11 generations away from Abraham. So you got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, these 12 sons. They all become tribes. You got all these 10 generations to Jesse. Then you're at David. Under David's rule, David became king, under David's rule, the 12 tribes started to come together again because they saw David as one after God's own heart. So all of these 12 sons of Jacob, who have all these over 10 generations, are now coming back together under one kingdom. And David's helping bring that together. David had a son, Solomon. Now, you remember we talked about Solomon last week. When David died, Solomon took over the kingship, and now Solomon is in charge of this whole group of people. He's 19, maybe 20 years old, and he was so afraid. God said, what do you need? And Solomon said, I need wisdom. And Solomon is known as one of the wisest kings of all time. And if you didn't hear that sermon, you can go back and listen to it online. We talked about the importance of following God and being wise in the ways of God. Proverbs 3, 5, 6. You can go read it. And so you have Solomon, who is this wise king. All right? Now, Solomon has a son, and that son is Rehoboam. What Solomon did is he continued his father's rule, David, and helped solidify the kingdoms and bring those all together. And through his wisdom, there was one huge Israelite kingdom of all these generations of people who were together sort of as one group of people focused on having King Solomon their king. Now, Solomon had a son, Rehoboam. Solomon died, and Rehoboam is going to become king. This is where we pick up in 1 Kings 12. Rehoboam went to Shechem, where all Israel had come to make him king. When Jeroboam, Nebat's son, heard the news, he returned from Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon. The people sent and cried and called for Jeroboam, who along with the entire Israelite assembly went and said to Rehoboam, we need to just call him like Jeff and Ron. Okay, so Rehoboam, your father made our workload very hard for us. If you will lessen the demands your father made of us and lighten the heavy workload he demanded of us, then we will serve you. And he answered them, come back in 3 days. So the people left. Okay, so what's happening here is Rehoboam is becoming king. Jeroboam is his cousin. Jeroboam was over some of the leadership of those other tribes, and he had actually fled because the workload under Solomon was so heavy. So the people went to Jeroboam and said, hey, go talk to your cousin Rehoboam and say, lighten the load. And so they did that. So they went to Rehoboam, who's now the king over all the Israelites. They went to him and said, hey, will you lighten the load? So Rehoboam said, come back in 3 days. So the people left, which is just good wisdom. If you have children or you have somebody that comes to you and you don't know what you're doing, just say, oh, come back tomorrow. And then you go home and you figure out, go and talk to other wise people, and you can come back and figure out what you're doing. So he said, come back in 3 days. So the people left. Then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon when he was alive. What do you advise? Rehoboam asked. How shall I respond to these people? So he's now gone to this wise council who helped counsel his father Solomon, who was one of the wisest of all kings. And they said to him, if you will be a servant to this people by answering them and speaking good words today, they replied, then they will be your servants forever. But Rehoboam ignored the advice the elders gave him and instead sought the counsel of the young advisors who had grown up with him and now served him. All right, so what you have going on, instead of going and listening to the old guys who had been through it and actually had some wisdom, Rehoboam went to his buddies, his other teenage friends, and said, what should I do here? Those dumb, stupid teenagers, those are not nice words to use, but I want to make it clear, they don't have any more sense than Rehoboam does. But he goes and asks them. He ignored the advice of the elders that gave him instead, sought the counsel of the young advisors who had grown up with him and now served him. What do you advise? He asked them. How should we respond to these people who have said to me, listen, the workload your father demanded, or lighten the workload your father demanded of us? And the young people who had grown up with him said to him, this people said to you, your father made our workload heavy, lighten it for us? Now this is what you should say to them. My baby finger is thicker than my father's entire waist. So if my father made your workload heavy, I'll make it even heavier. And if my father disciplined you with whips, I'll do it with scorpions." Jeroboam and all the people returned to Rehoboam on the third day, just as the king had specified when he said, "Come back to me in 3 days." And the king then answered the people harshly. He ignored the elders' advice and instead followed the young people's advice. He said, "My father made your workload heavy, but I'll make it even heavier. My father disciplined you with whips, but I'll do it with scorpions." The king didn't listen to the people because this turn of events came from the Lord, so that he might keep the promise he delivered from Ahiah from Shiloh concerning Jeroboam, Nabat's son. When all Israel saw that the king wouldn't listen to them, the people answered the king, "Why should we care about David? We have no stake in Jesse's son. Go back to your homes, Israel. You better look after your own house now, David." So they basically said, "Rehoboam, we don't have any buy-in to you. We don't care about your, grandfather Jesse or your great-grandfather David or even really Solomon, because you're not following after this wise counsel." When King Rehoboam sent Abram to them, Adoram to them, he was the elder of the work gang. All Israel stoned him to death. So Rehoboam said, okay, he's going to follow these rules, and he's going to send this guy basically to be a taskmaster over the people. And he showed up to make their workload heavier, and they're like, "Oh, here's what we're going to do. We're just going to stone you. We're going to send a message back to Rehoboam." And they killed his head worker guy. So when they killed him, then it continues on here. Israel has been, when King Rehoboam sent him, okay, great, they stoned him to death. King Rehoboam quickly got in his chariot and fled to Jerusalem. Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. Now here's the rest of this story. So you have these 12 tribes, and you have all these generations, and you have these people start to come together under David's kingship. Then Solomon, son of King David, takes over, and he's wise. He's following after God. He's seeking God's counsel. And in that wisdom, he brings the kingdom together even stronger. All of these generations are together. And then Solomon dies, and his son Rehoboam takes over. And Rehoboam, instead of listening to the wise counsel of the elders, he listened to his friends, he made it harder on the people, and they rebelled. So you had these 12 tribes, all these generations. 10 of those tribes said, "We're going to follow Jeroboam, and we're going north." And they became the kingdom of Israel. 2 tribes, the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin, said, "All right, Rehoboam, we're going to stick with you." And they became the kingdom of Judah. So from that point on, because Rehoboam did not listen to wise counsel, from that day on, the Israelite people have been forever split for all of history. Now what happened is, if you go and look at more history, you had the northern kingdom, the Israelites, and you have the kingdom of Judah in the south. Because they were not a unified force, it wasn't too terribly long, it's a couple hundred years, the Assyrians came in and just kicked tail on the Israelites and just conquered them and then put them into exile, and then the Israelites that were there became known as like modern-day Samaritans. They're across Samaria and other areas. Now, if you know anything about your kind of Bible history, the southern kingdom eventually got conquered by the Babylonians, but they were known as the Jews. They were the king of Judah. They became known as the Jews. They're the modern-day Jews from these 2 tribes that split off. Jews and Samaritans hate each other. You read a story about the Good Samaritan in Luke, the Gospel of Luke. You can go back and read it there. A Jewish person came by, saw the Samaritan in the street. The Jewish person didn't want to help because he's like, "You're a Samaritan." That Jewish person hated that Samaritan because of Rehoboam's inability to listen to wise counsel. Split the kingdom. As I was doing some reading, doing some research, I was thinking, what would be different today? What would be different today? 2,900 years later. Rehoboam is around early 900 BC. 2,900 years later. What would the Israelite kingdom, what would the Jewish people look like today if Rehoboam would have listened to wise counsel. If they wouldn't have split the kingdoms, if they wouldn't have been conquered, if they wouldn't have been so broken and then in exile and then actually ended up hating each other. Because of one guy. There's always more that goes to it. There's always, two sides to every story, of course. But it's clear Rehoboam's inability to listen to wise counsel led him straight up a volcano that exploded, and he never conquered life's mountains. He never conquered the mountain that God had in store for the Israelite people. I wonder, for us, 1 generation, 2, 3, 4, 5 generations, how will those generations be affected because of the choices we choose today? And not just the choices we choose, but do we seek wise counsel in making those choices? Do we seek wise counsel in making those choices? I don't know if you guys have had an opportunity. Dana Brown is one of our church members. If you have not met him, meet him, talk with him, buy him a cup of coffee. He has, now you got to ask him a lot of questions. He's not necessarily the most outgoing guy and going to tell you all kinds of stories. He has so much humility. But he is a treasure trove of, is that the right word, trove? He's a huge, vast conglomerate of stories. That's not even the right word either. He's cool. All right? He tells some amazing stories. So just in an email exchange this week, he shared a story with me about when he was in the Marines, and he was in this group of Marines, and he was in Vietnam. And so his group of Marines were in Vietnam, and they were told, in a sense, that be careful where you go because the area around here is booby-trapped. And so don't go wandering out because the area around us has, there's destruction and there's death around through the enemy who wants to kill us. Well, there was one guy who thought he was kind of cool, and as they were in this one area, he wanted to go off a little bit to one side and up this railroad berm and to see what was up there. And everybody was saying, stick with us, because together we're, keeping a watch on booby traps and paying attention. He's like, no, I'm just going to go right up here. So he starts to go up this railroad berm, and within about 90 seconds, a huge explosion happens. His whole group of people go over to see what's going on. They try to attend to his wounds. He blew up through a booby trap, basically. They try to attend to his wounds. Dana calls for a medevac, and shortly after that, the guy dies. That guy could have been the nicest guy ever. Could have had the highest IQ in all the military. Idiot. Because he wasn't willing to listen to wise counsel, he's dead. There's no more generations for him. Now, I'm not trying to be unkind. I'm trying to be serious and so straightforward. There are so many times that we don't conquer life's mountains because we are stupid. Because we don't seek the wisdom of others who are so much smarter than us. We want healthy marriages. We never spend any time with people who have healthy marriages. We want to move forward in our faith. We never spend time with people who are forward in their faith. We want to be successful at work and money management and all these things. We want to have a godly sense onto all those aspects of life, but we never spend time with godly people who are making smart choices in those places. If we don't do that, it's likely we will not conquer life's mountains. We will not conquer the mountains that God has placed before us. Because one of the key ways that God talks to us and leads us today is through the wise counsel of others. We turn a blind eye to it. Last year, I had the opportunity to be great white shark diving. On our boat was Joe Romero. Joe Romero is one of the #1 underwater videographers. He works for Discovery, National Geographic. He hosts Shark Week. So if you go back to last year's Shark Week and go look at Monster Mako, he's the one hosting that deal. He just has a tremendous wisdom. So we were out diving with these sharks, and there were 2 other underwater photographers on the boat. Every night for 2 or 3 hours, they were reviewing Joe Romero's footage that he shot that day, and Joe was coaching them on how to be better photographers. And he's talking about all these things like, you got to lock your feet down in the cage, and you got to get down low because these types of sharks are kind of circling around the backside and coming up the side of the cage before they attack the bait, and that gives you time to have your camera out of the cage and follow them along, and the sun's right and all this stuff. And he's telling all these stories. And I'm over there with my buddies, and we have these little underwater GoPros. They're like the size of a deck of cards. I mean, it's like we're like infants in this world of like total adulthood. I promise you, all I can tell you, those two other photographers, underwater photographers, did not have one conversation with the rest of us about how to video underwater. They didn't. Why would they waste their time? They knew we were a bunch of amateurs. We were a bunch of tourists, like, oh, sharks, let's get eaten. Joe Romero, man, that guy had tons of equipment. He just got a VR camera. He's going to start videoing underwater virtual reality. So in the future, you'll be able to like pretend like you're. Anyway, it's cool. It's awesome. The point of that is he's cool. Underwater photographers hang out with him because he has so much wisdom on the subject. What is going on in your life right now? What's happening? Where does God need to be interjected in some aspect of your life? Maybe it's the way you manage money. Maybe it's the way you give your resources to those in need. Maybe it's the way that your marriage operates. Maybe it's the way that you're raising your children. Maybe it's the way you're trying to figure out singleness. Maybe it's the way you're trying to figure out a new marriage. Maybe it's the way that you want to grow as a disciple in Jesus Christ. Whatever that is, wherever you want God interjected in your life, are you seeking wise counsel? Are you seeking wise counsel? If you're not, it's likely that you'll never reach the peak of the mountain that God is calling you to. If you're not, it's likely you'll never reach the peak that God is calling you to. 1 Kings 12:19 says this. Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. Rehoboam's choice to not seek wise counsel has put a whole community of people into rebellion until this day. Nearly 3,000 years. Don't let that be your story. We have a God who loves us. He sent His Son Christ to share tremendous wisdom with us. And through the Holy Spirit, He gifts people to have the resource and the wisdom to help us along in life. Find those people. Seek wise counsel. And conquer life's greatest mountains. Let me pray for us. God, we give you thanks for your love. We give you thanks for just being a God who leads us to amazing mountains, who allows us to conquer the greatest things in this life. And that's not to conquer the things of this world, but we conquer the good things, the fruit of your Spirit, those things of love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and self-control. All of those things allow us to be fruitful in this world. Those things come as we seek after your word, as we spend time just in prayer, and as we connect with others who are more wise than we ever could be. God, the greatest leaders, the most successful marriages, the most amazing parents are not the people with the highest IQ, but they are the people who are willing to ask questions, willing to ask for help, and receive the collective knowledge of wise counsel. So God, in whatever area we're lacking, whatever area we want and need your Spirit to move and motivate us forward, that we might be your people, whatever area that might be, Lord, help us to have the courage to seek wise counsel. And place before us the people who can lead us into a deeper relationship with you, the God and the Creator of all life, the one who allows us to conquer life's greatest mountains. We thank you for your love. We thank you for your grace. It's in your good name we pray. Amen.